What kind of economic systems are best at allowing us to exercise the fact that we are created in the image and likeness of God?
Now keep in mind that if you take tiny steps towards any goal, it's just a matter of when you're going to reach it.
Scarcity is the first lesson of economics. Now, the first lesson of politics is to forget the first lesson of economics.
If you don't provide real, actual value to people in exchange for the money that you're asking for in return, you will lose over time.
We can see the economy as a social web that God has created for people to serve each other with their work.
We have the Word of God that provides for us a foundation for knowledge, for truth, for beauty, for goodness, for dignity and value in human beings. We have the Word of God that provides for us things like this. Ready? Thou shalt not steal.
Ethics on the legitimacy of wealth and entrepreneurship individually. Secondly, post-millennial eschatology, that is, the kingdom of God expands across the earth before Jesus comes back in final judgment. And the link to get those two together is the idea of the pursuit of self-interest leading to widespread economic growth and social transformation.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Christ in Capital, the show that wants to encourage you to love God, love neighbor, and build something. I'm the host, Dustin Johnson, and this episode is going to be really exciting. Today with me, I have Maceo Jourdan, who is the CEO, I think. Is that right, Maceo? The CEO of LOOR?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. I'm really excited. A couple weeks ago, I actually had a interview with Marcus Pittman for the listeners, who is kind of one of the minds behind LOOR, and he kind of talked us through a lot of the groundwork that they laid for LOOR. We couldn't really get into a lot of the details, so I'm hoping that we can do that with this episode. Maceo, just to kind of get people a little familiar with you, I'm going to give you, I think, 4 little quick lightning round get to know me questions. All right. The first one is your favorite or most used app on your phone.
that is such a horrible question for me. I'm like this crazy walking oxymoron where I use technology. I hate apps on the phone. Let me just say it.
Okay.
The only one that I use, I would say regularly, is called My Net Diary. It tracks meals and whatnot. What's actually hilarious about that is for the last 2 years, I've quite literally eaten the same thing for all 3 meals. So okay. I don't know what the purpose is, but that's the one.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Funny.
I feel like there's another episode there, but that's not what we're here for. So, okay. So, film genre. Favorite film genre? Documentary, mystery, superhero. What you got?
You know what? I am just a fan of art. It's rare. The last movie that I can think of that I didn't like was called Tess. This dates me, of course. I was a kid when we saw it. Worst movie ever. Incredibly boring. But I've gotten to the point now where I can truly appreciate most movies, TV shows, for their artistry. However, I have to say I'm still a diehard Marvel fan because when I was a kid, that's like what I grew up on. So 100% superhero movies.
Sweet.
That's my favorite.
Okay, so we're gonna expect to see superhero movies on LOOR competing with Marvel in the next 5 to 10 years, right?
Dude,
all right.
If I could star, oh my goodness, I would love to play a superhero.
Okay. The last one, most influential businessman. So the thing that brought up this question was I went through a phase where I was like Gary V, like digesting or taking in all of his stuff. But I was wondering, like, Gary V, Tony Robbins, Elon Musk, who would you look to as your business philosophy poster boy?
Yeah, one of my nicknames is the killer of sacred cows. The problem with the names that you mentioned, we'll probably get into during the podcast. I actually prefer to look back in history. So for me, it'd be a toss-up between Rockefeller and Carnegie, actually.
Ah, sweet. Yeah, we did. I did an episode on the Gilded Age, a couple episodes back. Yes, so fascinating, so fascinating. Yeah, I might have to get you on to talk about that sometime in the future. But anyways, let's get into lore. But I guess first, what's your background? What field are you in, or what kind of got you to where you are today?
What got me to where I am today was a comment, a single comment by a man at the time who I held in high esteem. And he said, in the world of business, there are tacticians, so people who can, manage your Facebook account, or they can sell. And he said there are strategists, people that can see, so-called see around corners and all that. And he said, but it's really rare that you find anybody who's both. Now, the reason why I described him in the past tense is he held himself out there like that he was that person, but he truly lacked a lot of skill in the tactical arena.
Okay.
And so what got me to where I am now, which I would describe myself as a CEO, CMO hired gun for like the last 10 years or so, it's been an endeavor to really build those skills. So that requires a deep dive into what is the difference between strategy and tactics, and what are the psychological components required to go from a strategic mindset to a tactical mindset. How do you arrange your day? In other words, how do you really do that? Which ties in with my focus on these historical businessmen. What I find severely lacking today, and this is all part of the journey, when I was studying different people and looking at modern people, Tony Robbins in particular, I found that they really didn't innovate. I've got no problem saying it publicly, just because I've never done business with the guy, but I know from firsthand that doing business with the Robbins Group is going to get you like a very bad deal. They're going to steal all your stuff. They're going to release it as their own. And this also ties into lore, by the way.
Okay.
And so as I investigated guys like Robbins, and I knew of Gary Vee when he got started. He's a byproduct of the trend that he's running.
Right.
And there's nothing there in other words, there's nothing that Gary did like Rockefeller. Look, people forget there was no, petroleum industrial complex. In fact, people were like, what are we going to do with all this black stuff? They had nothing to use it for. So he literally had to create an industry out of nothing, which you've really got to go back to that golden age to find it in large quantities. Because remember, cars were new, oil refining was new. In fact, industrial production was brand new. And you can get some parallels with like cell phones and whatnot, but it's not the same. Computers, I would say yes. So looking at somebody like a Jobs or a Gates, Ellison, you can kind of get the same flavor, but really, after looking at all those people, I would say in reflection of the backdrop of my trading career, so as a hedge fund trader for quite a while, I was successful, made a lot of money, made a lot of rich people even richer, which is part of why I got out. So that experience taught me implicitly that there's a difference between saying you have a good idea or having an opinion about what might work, and then what actually works.
Yeah.
So all that in a melting pot is what led me here. But then I would say the foundation of it was really founded on my belief, my faith in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, the reality that the Bible is the truth. And so the admonition that we have from the scriptures is to, do your work as unto the Lord. So, it's this idea that you're not just working for a paycheck, or, you're not just doing the bare minimum. And so once I exited from my company and I thought, okay, I'm going to take on this consulting thing, and I'm actually, going to go work with other people, I looked at it from this standpoint. When I'm standing in front of my Lord, and there's a different judgment there. You're in the Bema seat, and of course we could do a whole podcast about that. But it's more of, hey, what did you do with the stuff that I gave you, right? So the parable of the talents.
Right.
I certainly didn't want to be the guy that hid the thing. That was bad.
Correct.
But then in the other two, and make doubling what you were given. You have to have a commitment to a greater artistry, a greater, I would say, result or productivity.
Yep.
So it's always been, I've always had a mindset, and it's always been a reality that is others centered.
Yeah.
Right. And so I love picking on people. So there's a guy on Facebook, Sam Ovens, and he sells this course on how to be a consultant. Well, that dude, Sam, has never had a business. Like, if you look at his backstory, he's just some dude that started selling how to, like, chisel money out of people on Facebook. So what you get out of that, like, I've spoken to a few people that have gone through his course, is somebody who, was a welder that's now going to train people, and they think, okay, I've got this recipe, and all I have to do is follow the recipe. And that, kind of sums up the problem with any framework or static way of trying to say, here's how you build a business. Principles, a little bit, right? So if you go through an MBA program, or something like what Sam Ovens produces, or Gary Halbert used to, or Tony Robbins, you're going to get a recipe. And they tell you, if you teach other people to follow this recipe, then they will be successful. My challenge would be, go do that with anything else, right?
Right.
Go take a cake recipe, or, go to get a Bobby Flay recipe, and just take the recipe and go tell somebody, okay, here's what you have to do to produce the dish, and then put it side by side with Bobby Flay's. Like, are you really going to get the same results?
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
So, again, it's like all of this is swirling together to bring me to where I am now. So, I spent a lot of years working with companies on my own dime in an effort to improve them. I got paid based on results. So I've done crazy experiments where I've worked with companies, again, on my own dime, just to see if I could go into a company and, quote unquote, convince them something was a good idea. So the whole theory relates into selling and building a business. People say, oh, well, it sells itself, or everybody wants it. It's like, okay, well, let's go test that. So I've experimented like that throughout the years in order to make myself a better operator, to understand strategy better, people better, customers better, how to sell to customers, how to sell a team, right? You got to convince a team one direction is better than the next.
Right. So
very long-winded answer to give you where I am today.
That's good. It's the background is going to lead us into the next question. So I guess briefly, so since you've got all this background, all these different areas, how did you get linked up with the LOOR project? Like, was it just connections you had with, like, Marcus and John, or were you looking for startups to get involved with, or how did that kind of play out?
Yeah, it's funny. I wasn't being coy. I was actually chuckling. I kind of deliberately avoided that part just because I wanted to give us food for the rest of our time together. I knew John. So John Speed, one of the founders, he and I go back to the early 2000s. We were in a tract and street preaching ministry together. I helped him out in his ministry for a number of years.
Okay.
And so it's funny to hear him describe it. He's like, yeah, I never knew what Maceo did. I just knew, he was a rich guy and he, was a venture capitalist. So, which is kind of funny, to hear somebody else's perception of me. Which I have worked with startups for a long time, invested in a lot of startups, but really it was that, early ministry and business, I guess, experience that John saw early on was the main reason why they approached me. So John and Marcus, understood that there was a gap in the skill tree of the company, which I could possibly fill.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that because when they reached out to me and said that I'm going to get you in contact with our CEO, I was like, oh, I thought it was just you two. So I was like, okay, good. Okay, so now we're going to get into the meat. LOOR. When I spoke with Marcus a couple of weeks ago, he was kind of dancing around not giving too much information about what LOOR is, what the business model is, because I don't think it had been widely revealed yet. And so he kind of hinted that LOOR is not really going to be a direct competitor with, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Disney. And there's kind of more, it's kind of a different approach to the whole streaming thing. But can you just give us like, what is LOOR? What's the business model and how is it different than the other services? Because I think a lot of Christians that are kind of looking in at LOOR or who are kind of staying on top of what LOOR is doing, the mindset is, okay, this is going to be a streaming service kind of thing. But maybe that's wrong. How should we be thinking about what LOOR is and what it's going to provide?
That is an excellent question. I'll start with the last one and work my way backwards.
Okay.
And when I say we, what does that mean? Am I talking about all of humanity? Just
Yeah.
men who like to lift weights? What does that really mean?
Right.
And so right now we is bullseyed around what I would just generically call Bible-believing Christians.
Okay.
And that's because our initial content, is going to be very focused. And from a business standpoint, and I'm going to try and mix in lots of anecdotes, because I listened to a few episodes and, Christians, they just need some help when it comes to business. And I've been rolling around in the muck of business for 20 years, so
Yeah.
I tend to think I'm a little bit
You're
qualified.
the guy.
Yeah, so when you're thinking about a business, you've got to think small in order to grow big. Most people think, oh, we've got to go get 1 million customers. No, dude, go get one. Seriously, go get the first person that you don't know, that's not your mom or your uncle or your cousin, that you can talk to cold, pitch them your idea, and they literally pull their wallet out and say, how do I buy that? And that's like a literal test. I mentioned a guy earlier, Gary Halbert. He taught that to me. He actually used it. He drove this hot pink Mercedes specifically so that when people walked up to the car, made a comment about it, that he could pitch them his copy ideas, which is brilliant when you think about it. So
Yeah.
the reason why we're starting that small, is so that we can gain a foothold and then grow into our next larger markets.
Right.
So that would be the who is it for. And so we'll talk a little bit about Netflix and YouTube, and again, I'll kind of devolve into some stories here. We forget that YouTube was started back in 2005.
Yep.
I saw them when they launched, saw them when they grew, and we kind of forget that it used to be only like cat pictures and stupid teenager tricks.
Right.
Because now it's like a true media platform.
I may have contributed to some of those, but
but that was their target, right? And most people don't know that their demographic has been basically 12 to 17-year-old males forever,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what I laugh about when advertisers are dumping massive amounts of money into something like YouTube, it's like, why would you spend that on a teenager? Like, they're not going to buy a $20,000 piece of equipment or whatever somebody's selling. Now it has morphed and it's grown, and it's expanded in its demographic, but that's really been the meat of their audience. Now, long term, of course, that's a brilliant strategy because back, we're 15 years. Sorry, hello, 5. How long are we away from?
Yeah, 15 years. 15 years.
I can't do math. I can't do math talk occasionally.
You're a business guy, not a mathematician.
So,
Come on.
15-year-old. Actually, that's hilarious. I just cannot do math and talk. So the 15-year-old, when they launched, is now 30.
Yep.
So it's not like it's a bad strategy. And when you're thinking about who you're going to build your business around, that 15-year-old is eventually going to be 30 if the business can survive.
Right.
So we're not competing against YouTube. There's just way too much content. We're not competing directly against Netflix. Again, there's way too much content. Now, will eventually we look like that? Absolutely. As a byproduct of what we're doing, we will have more stuff on there.
Yeah.
The reason why we don't want to be a YouTube is, frankly, you get lost in the amount of content, and let's face it, a lot of the stuff is just horrible, right? I mean, it's not something you would want to watch for a wide variety of reasons.
Right.
Now, ironically enough, the same thing goes for Netflix, right? So Netflix for years would not publish their top 10. I personally know from inside information the reason why they didn't want to do that is because there's a conflict. There's an agenda that Netflix has, which is to promote, a lot of things that I would say are anti-Christian, right? So homosexuality, homosexual marriage, the trans, whatever they're calling it now. And I'm not being rude. I just don't know what the term is for it. But,
I think the definitions change daily. But anyways.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to keep up with it because I really don't watch the news. So I apologize about that. Again, I'm not trying to be insulting.
Yes.
So they have that agenda, right? And the kind of secret in Netflix is that those shows generally underperform, especially if like those topics are a main portion of the film.
Can I just insert something real quick? We just had a discussion.
Of course.
Well, I just recorded an episode. It hasn't been released yet, but it was on the whole equity topic and how they have. And part of the discussion was about YouTube and these big tech companies or like streaming services that have these like quotas almost. It's like they have a template that they have to put out there, and they have to fill in the gaps with whatever the cultural hot demographic is, or the sentimental, whatever pulls the heartstrings. You got to plug into the little slots, kind of like one of those. Well, never mind. But anyway, so you've got that it's like almost like template form on Netflix, but you've also got that in like PureFlix, which is like the Christian, which I think they were just purchased by Sony, weren't they? I think.
Yeah, PureFlix went to Sony to die. If anybody's confused about that,
I can imagine.
I got some oceanfront property here in Arizona to sell you.
But yeah, you got both versions of that that kind of plug and play, content quote unquote creation model. So I'm hoping LOOR is not going down that path. But anyways, keep going. I just wanted to plug that in there because it seemed like what you were right down that same alley that you're talking about.
You heard it here first. I'll actually put some money on this. My standard bet is $0.05. I got that from my mom. Okay. I'm willing to bet that the formulas work for a reason. So what I'm willing to bet is that when we open this up for creative expression, the creators that are willing to stick closer to the formulas will do better than the ones that don't. And if you look in the art world, you'll find this everywhere, right? So if you have this truly groundbreaking artist, let's call it, like there was an artist, I forget his name, he did this, it was a banana stuck on a wall with duct tape. Like that was literally the
I saw
thing.
That. Yeah.
Now, part of his shtick is, shock and doing something different. But that's what I mean. Like that to somebody is art, right? Obviously, that artist thought it was art.
Right.
The gallery thought enough of the artist to take a risk and say, okay, I guess we'll go with it. Well, then, of course, you got to let people in. And for the most part, people were like, this is stupid. But fast forward now, I can't remember how many years later it is, I was just reading an article, and yes, I'm so old, I still get magazines. I'm sure people will be laughing at me for that. But so in this magazine, they kind of did this reprise, and he talked about that. And here's the interesting thing. Now it's considered like this major moment. So one thing that we have to remember is, unfortunately, for the most part, human beings are stuck in two really weird places. One is this future that we want and we dream for, and that's why we buy stupid things and we get into trouble.
Yeah.
And then there's the past, right? So we tend to look at the past and pick out what we like. Actually, God designed our brains to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So we revise the past as we live to make it better. And then we're constantly going towards this future, which is probably not only not realistic, but unattainable. Well, that's your customer, right? So if you ever wonder why the formulaic stuff works, it's because the formulas fit into that framework that we're built around. Now, I'm not saying, like, we're definitely not pushing any one thing on our creators. So I'll get back to some of our core mission.
Yeah.
First of all, our core mission is to bring to light the frank and open discrimination that Christians are facing.
Mm-hmm.
We've had, for the first time in American history, senators and people on the floor of the House of Representatives questioning somebody about their faith, like directly.
Right,
and
saying
directly
that
voicing
the dogma lives loudly in you.
Whatever that means. Yeah, that's the kind of comment that'll get me swearing. I apologize. It's like, what? It lives loud. I mean, that's such a New Age statement and such a religious statement.
It is. It is very religious.
The irony, I actually turned it off because of the irony. I couldn't take it. So that's happening for the first time.
Yep.
In a country, by the way, that's laws were predicated on our rights pre-existing the state and being completely disassociated from the state. Whereas in most other countries, it's the state that gives you rights. Now we could talk about
takes away. Yep.
Yeah, right. We could talk about how even Scalia, has made when he was alive, made comments about, well, if you want another right, pass another law. It's like, okay, what?
Yeah.
Like,
for real.
no, we have rights because we were created, Mr. Scalia.
Right.
And so that's part of our foundation. It's like our rights are ours because God, not because, the president or the Senate, or any of these pinheads that are, sitting in office.
Right.
And so that's one of our core principles. And it's also that the reality in our media today, and this is Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, HBO, there are roughly 9 people that decide 100% of the stuff that goes onto our various screens. And again, if people think that there's not a problem with that, or if people think that they're somehow impartial or, not imposing their beliefs and their will on that content, I got a bunch of oceanfront property in Arizona to tell you. I mean, nobody can be that naive, really.
And I don't think that people could deny that those companies or companies like them have shaped our moral landscape for the past, decade, 2 decades. So to insinuate that they don't have the influence that they do is really silly, in my opinion.
Well, we could get into the psychological aspects of it. I mean, story is literally the most powerful persuasive device known to man.
Exactly.
Jesus used them. It's when you actually look at a brain listening to a story versus one that's like being sold something, and of course they've done these experiments, completely different, brain activity. It's just a different place.
Yeah.
So before I forget, I'll go in a slightly different direction. Unfortunately, most people don't read a lot. There's a book out there called After the Ball. After the Ball was written by 2 homosexual men, specifically outlining just like Mein Kampf outlined Adolf Hitler's whole plan, it's like we didn't have to be confused. The dude wrote a book. So their book was literally how to indoctrinate America into the homosexual lifestyle.
Is this the one that's
So
about
the reason why
like the programming, deprogramming?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Scary. Yep. Okay.
And so, again, what people expect naively is that there's some sort of check and balance. This is why they get deceived and why they don't do anything. What they assume is that there's someone or some committee, they wrongly expect that these people are not just running amok. And I've got news for everybody. They're running amok, America. And they've been running amok now for 45 years, and you can see their agenda after the ball laid out. In fact, specifically they said, we need to present the homosexual lifestyle in as wholesome a light as possible so that when our less palatable practices come to light, people are already predisposed to like us. So what does that mean in English?
Yes.
It means you're going to get a TV show with a relatively good-looking, not so abnormal homosexual man. This was I can't remember the show now, but he was the co-star. It was, he played, sort of against the heterosexual female. He was her neighbor. It was a popular show. And so here was an openly homosexual man that was being, if you will, put up as a sort of this paragon of neighborly existence.
Yeah.
My point in that long-winded story is this. That was deliberate. It was specifically designed to deceive everybody because of the nature of the homosexual lifestyle. And the people in leadership, and we have to call it leadership because these are organized movements.
Yes.
The people in leadership recognized that Americans were not going to like this. Now, I don't know about your whole listeners, but I know personally when somebody does that, I put that in the category of just outright dishonesty.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so those two things work hand in hand. Or there are maybe even four things that I just described. So another part of what LOOR is here to do is to bring to light these agendas, to advocate for the Christian worldview, just like the authors of After the Ball are advocating for their worldview, just like these whole woke crazies are advocating for their worldview.
Right.
And so we're saying, look, we've got to advocate for this now. We can't presuppose that our culture is quote unquote Christian.
Right.
We need to do a better job of, if you'll pardon the word, selling the Christian ideology.
No,
and
yeah.
So let's now kind of bring this home into story. If you get into any media today, generally you're going to find the Christian is the wacko, the serial killer. They're either bad guys or they're crazy.
And that's deliberate too.
Well, absolutely it is. So we're saying, hold on a minute. We've got quite literally the foundational stories for the world. We've got quite literally the stories that enabled the Revolutionary War, freeing the slaves in America, freeing the slaves throughout Western Europe.
Yep.
It is specifically because of these biblical stories that these acts were done, because individuals had to judge themselves against the light of that scripture.
Yes.
Not against some man-made rule. Listen, if there was just man-made rules, we would still have slavery today. There's really no, other than a godly imposition, there's no real reason to outlaw slavery. I mean, what's not to love about free labor? You know what I mean?
Well, they're going that route now too. So.
Well.
Yeah. That's another rabbit trail. Anyways.
Right. So there's obviously some really big things that we're taking on with LOOR. At the core of it, it's Christians producing art, not Christian art. I think that's been part of the problem.
Yeah.
And we need to start celebrating people for their artistry, and we need to give believers a chance to express their Christianity and their walk with the Lord in their art however they see fit, not according to 8 or 9 individuals' worldview or some network's idea of what a show needs to be at time mark 4 and time mark 5.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So so then when you talk about Christians being able to express their worldview in their art, from a business model perspective, is that going to look like individual, like independent creators approaching LOOR and reaching out and saying, hey, I want to make this film, are you going to fund me? Or is it going to be something where you're creating a link between the creator and maybe possible consumers of that content? Or is that something that we not going to talk about yet? I don't know what's off limits with LOOR right now. So
actually, that's why it was a good, good that we moved our time up today, because we were just talking about that.
Okay.
So our first phase is going to be very much like a patron of the arts, where for various subscription levels, people will get not only access to the content, but access to the artists. And seeing readings, right, where the actors are coming in and actually, reading the script and working on it, being able to interact with director, producer, and really experiencing the production of a show in a way. Yeah, I mean, you get behind the scenes on DVDs and whatnot, but I mean, experiencing it as it's happening.
Yeah, like real time.
It's really, yeah. I mean, it really speaks to the ability that we have with technology. When I started video online, it was 2004, 2005. Bandwidth was really limited. There was no one player. In fact, I mean, I could talk about my one biggest mistake was, financing a tech company out of my own pocket. It was based on, some of that video and kind of membership site delivery. It was way too early to market, but even that has come so much further. People forget, 2005, as crazy as it sounds, Microsoft actually had the best video player on the market, and we had tested a bunch of different ones. So we've come so far. Yeah. We've got supercomputers in our pockets with our, Android and iPhone devices, so that we can deliver a high quality, reliable video stream basically to everybody. Yes. I know there are people that just can't, but everybody can get it, basically.
Yeah. And I think just to throw this in there, I think was it Michael Bay who created that? It was that snowball fight video just with his iPhone, and it was like really awesome quality. Like it was good quality. I'm like, everyone has one of these in their pocket. I mean, they can just go ahead and make it. I mean, yeah. It's
a 4K video now, man. I mean, like I've got a Sony A6400 now. When I look at that thing, I can count the pores on my face. It's just yep. So technology has gotten to the point where what we're talking about is possible.
Yes.
So there's from a future looking, and we're not registered yet, but what I'm about to say is forward looking, and there are a lot of things that can get in the way of us executing. But in spite of all of those risks, we have a unique opportunity. Just like Apple was handed a unique opportunity when they, took certain technology from a phone company in Japan and launched the iPhone, or in the early days when Jobs went and saw the graphical user interface and the mouse. It's like we've got this conflux of events where it's not going to cost us umpteen millions of dollars to produce what will eventually be a full feature film.
Yeah.
So, for example, we've got an animation team. It's from a top tier studio. For obvious reasons, I can't mention the studio or any of their names.
Right.
That's because exciting. Again, Christians are being actively discriminated against, and if we release their names and their company, they would literally be fired, and they would be drummed out of the industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so that team could produce a film like, let's say, Frozen, as an example. But instead of taking 2 years and $100 million, we can produce that in an episodic way, right? So the subscribers would get access to creating the episodes. They get access to, the animators, see early work, get tours of everything that we're doing, watch actors, mime stuff out and all the different poster boards, and, get it one episode at a time. And then after we're finished, we release the feature film.
That's awesome.
So what we're also saying is we've got an opportunity to completely disrupt this factory, if you will, that is the movie business.
Yep.
And just like, as Ford, developed the early kind of production line, and then later on you had robotics and other things added on, it made things more efficient. You got a better product at a cheaper price. That's what we're saying. We're saying our investors and our subscribers can both enjoy the fruits of that efficiency. And just put numbers around it, we can deliver video content today for about 1/100th of the price. So for a penny, we can deliver what used to cost around $10.
Oh, wow.
And everybody forgets that, it actually costs money to push video out over the internet. People think the internet is free, but it's only free because there's ads and other stuff.
Yep.
Bandwidth is actually still relatively expensive.
Yeah.
So the timing is right. We have an actual need because I don't think anybody would argue that we're in this war of ideologies. And I hate to use that language, but when
it's true.
When you look at the landscape, it is a war.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got, whenever you have opportunity, crossed with necessity, that's when you truly have the chance to build something huge.
Yeah.
And so our aim is not to be another Netflix or anything else. It's to replace them. So in 7 years, we will have literally everyone else as the second choice when it comes to Christ-centered or even just generic family-friendly content. They're going to think, okay, we have to pitch this to LOOR first, and we need to put this out on the LOOR distribution network. And then they're going to say, well, I guess we'll go to Netflix, since LOOR doesn't want us.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And that whole business model too, just the idea of connecting the artists or the consumers with the creators and giving kind of that intimate, backstage look at the creation of this stuff. It seems like it would be a good way of basically self-sustaining. Like if you have kids growing up seeing how their favorite movies are made without having to go to Disney World to see it, that can get kids thinking like, I have a story. Let me make this. Let me try what I saw my favorite director or content creator doing to make this movie or whatever. And then you've got this cycle where LOOR just keeps building on itself. I think that's really cool. That's really cool.
Yep. Well, so I will say this, and now this is getting to, so you got a Christian entrepreneur, they're listening to the podcast, and they've got dreams of building a big company. I can tell you from, unfortunately, taking a lot of money out of in my coffers, or my company's coffers, actually. The best way to do that is with investors. And it's really no different than, let's use the analogy of kids, sending a kid off to college. People talk about, kids are expensive. My experience, not really. My 4-year-old doesn't eat a lot. So it's not like, she's an extra $100 a month. My 14-year-old, on the other hand, now we're starting to get into, we need some venture capital. But so the analogy is, sending a kid off to college. Generally, for most Americans, that's when they have to go to outside finance. It's no different in a company. When you're going from, the, say, kindergarten business to middle school to high school, and then you're thinking, okay, I'm going to go off to college and make this something really big. that's when you've really got to start examining, where can I go to get finance? And we're no different. There's no way we're going to build a, $100 billion company bootstrapping. It's literally impossible.
Right.
But for now, absolutely, we want to get subscribers in. We want to find out what kind of content do they want. We want to give creators the most options in terms of getting their content out. Our initial framework, has the creators getting the lion's share of that revenue, not only, to pay for production, but they have to eat.
Yeah.
So in the early stages, LOOR is really going to be much like Amazon, a lot of what's called CapEx or capital expenditures, spending on our creators, on our infrastructure, so that we can deal with this chicken and the egg scenario that we're in, which actually Nathaniel Talbot, our COO, he just recently exited from a company called Spreedly. They handled payment processing. So he builds he brings a wealth of experience, not only on the technical side, but also, in getting finance and growing a venture-backed company. He put it that way, that, we've got the chicken and the egg. We need to get subscribers in order to get content creators, and we need to get content creators in order to get subscribers.
Right.
So the strategy is to divert maximum dollars from our subscribers to getting that content on, but our unhesitatingly and unwaveringly bold cry right now is that we need believers to think in terms of what ideology am I supporting?
Yes.
Let's take Frozen. I watch all my kids' movies before they see it. And it may sound weird, but it was because of one line in the main song, and the fact that there's magic. We can get into that. But there's one line in the song, the lead character sung says, "There are no rules for me." Well, and I want people to stop and think for a minute. We send kids to Sunday school, and they, by rote, are repeating songs. Well, why do we do that? Well, because it says to train up a child.
Right.
When you train up a child in the way they should go, they won't depart from it.
You're catechizing them.
Well,
yep.
What we forget is these kids don't turn off their learning brain when we plop them in front of Frozen or Moana, where we've got this character saying, "You're welcome for," it's this pagan character saying he created the mountains and the sun and the sky.
Right.
Well, what happens when kids are introduced to that? Well, they get indoctrinated in it. So, I'm a little less lenient with believers who complain about, kids who've quote unquote gone astray, when I find out that, they've been exposed to all of this other information.
Right.
So we need people to start thinking in those terms. Like, what are we putting in front of our kids? And my goodness, what are we putting ourselves in front of?
Mm-hmm.
Paul said, bad company corrupts good morals. So if we're sitting in front of, Game of Thrones and Empire, all these HBO kind of quote unquote gritty shows, or even things like LA Law or the Blue, the cop shows that have these characters with a specific agenda, where we look at them and say, well, it's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, that can swing in the wind, but let's at least just agree that God said don't do it.
Right. And the thing is, like, a lot of the characters, like, it wouldn't be such a big deal if the character that was doing some of these things was like a cautionary tale and was like the person who was teaching you that this is not the best way to go. But when it's the main character that's being glorified as the right, upstanding one that's saying some of these things, that's when you get into a place where you're like, hold on, what are we? I mean, every story is going to glorify something, and it's going to de-glorify, or whatever the opposite term is for that, something else. So there's a worldview being pushed, and I think that's the big, like we were talking about earlier, that's the big thing that big reason that Netflix and Hulu and all these people have had the influence that they have, because they have a worldview, and it's coming out in the screens that their content comes out of. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So okay, so I guess just to kind of give you the stage, what should the listeners that are listening to this podcast, what do you want them to know? obviously we want Christians to be critical of the content they consume, and we want them to put their money where their mouth is and donate, or how do they get in touch with LOOR? How do they donate? How do they contribute? What can they do to help this thing get going?
Well, I'll go out on a limb here and say, instead of a donation mindset, right now we need people to be commerce critics, right? So this is a business. We're not running a ministry, and we need people to support us, sure, because they believe in us, and we need them to help us to produce something that's commercially viable. I mean, I've been involved in ministry, now for 20 years roughly, and that's a hard road to hoe, going, relying on donations.
Yeah.
And so we want to earn it. We don't want people to feel obligated. I'm not here to guilt anybody. I'm definitely here to challenge people because I think Christians have been far too quiet for far too long. We've been far too complicit in Disney, Netflix, Sprouts, Amazon. I mean, you can almost go down the list of all these companies that are openly hostile to our worldview. And we just dismiss it and say, well, it's not that bad, or where else am I going to shop, or whatever other excuse we have.
Right.
And so we're definitely willing to challenge them on that. But we need people to support us because we deserve it. We need it. In the sense that we're producing, but our artists are producing good content. That our website is easy to navigate, and that us as a business provides value. And at the end of the day, we don't want people to watch something on Friday, and then when when Sunday rolls around, whether they're in church or not, they start reflecting on that, because Christians kind of do that, on Sunday. It's our day of reflection, if you will. We don't want them to have to think about, oh man, I really wish I hadn't watched that thing I watched, or being concerned about putting their child down in front of something, or saying, well, I guess it's okay because I really need to do X.
Yeah.
We need people to start thinking in those terms at the same time.
Okay.
And so in this early stage, we definitely are hoping that people will be graceful with us, because there's going to be, a lot of stuff isn't going to work. We're a new company.
Yeah.
We've got a grand vision. But at the same time, it's that feedback loop that's going to be, very much what we need from our constituents, our audience. And so going to LOOR.tv, that's LOOR.tv. We'll have sign-up forms there just so people can get on our early email list. We can involve them in this process, because we're developing the site, getting feedback. We're not expecting any money for that. And then, as we get closer to January 1st, we're going to be, launching our, real pay-to-play paywall site. And so the more people that we can have kind of kicking the tires and helping us iron out the kinks, the better.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Well, I know we're kind of coming up on an hour, so I wanted to kind of close this out, but thank you so much for doing this. It's really awesome to have someone in a kind of a CEO position to come on the show, because I know with this podcast we like to get people into the minds of creators and businessmen so that they can be encouraged to get out and make their own stuff, do their own thing. So I really appreciate your time. I know you've got a lot going on, especially trying to get this LOOR thing off the ground and running. I know time is a key resource. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate it. To the listeners, get involved. Be critical of the content that you're consuming. Bring your worldview to bear on the content that you're letting your kids watch, what you're watching. And then as LOOR, like Maceo was saying, as LOOR comes out, let's be that feedback loop that helps build this thing out. Let's build this thing out so we can, bring Amazon and Netflix to its knees. Anyways, again, Maceo, thank you so much. And is there any last thing you wanted to say before we kind of get out of here?
Dustin, I definitely want to leave people with maybe a flavor of something that I've learned.
Okay.
Solomon, when he wrote Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, hid so many gems. In fact, one of the recent episodes I listened of yours was on Ecclesiastes. I spent, a couple of years, maybe 3 years, just reading those two books. And there are a couple of interesting things. So Solomon's admonition was, don't set out to do evil and don't try to be overly good, because God is going to judge you. Right? And so I'm certainly not here, like Paul said, I'm not here to judge another man's workman. I'm certainly not going to criticize anyone for what they do or don't watch. That's between them and the Lord.
Right.
When it comes to business, too often we get caught up in what other people think Christians should look like, act like, and run their business like. And I found, just like Solomon said, if you try and run your business overly good, you're not going to be all that successful.
Right.
And so I would let people relax a little bit and say, okay, I think Christians have a good handle on what evil is. Just don't set out to do that, and then leave the rest up to the Lord.
Right. You're going to have rough edges, right? That's just how the world works.
Yeah, man. Look at David. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's anyway. And the second thing would be, kill the sacred cows. I've met a lot of the guys that are on the stage. I had the good fortune to run a very large e-commerce company for a long time. And of course, I got to sit in green rooms and, hear the behind the scenes kind of talk. And I can tell you there is nothing magical about Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs or Gary Vaynerchuk or Tony Robbins. None of these people have anything genetic or, some mystical information. Okay. They're simply people in a lot of cases that were at the right place at the right time. Bill Gates, if he would have been literally, I forget, it was either 2 streets or 2 miles to the south, we wouldn't even know who he is, because he wouldn't have been in the right school district to have the first computer in the area, and he never would have got the first contract. I think it was with Wang Computers. Tony Robbins, most people don't know, he started his career as a testimonial on a Guthrie Ranker infomercial, and he kind of hyped his way into a slot at Guthrie Ranker, and then they decided to take a risk on the guy to produce Personal Power. So it wasn't, it was through his direct effort, is my point. Like, he made that happen. So the last thing would be, at the end of the day, after 20 years in the trenches of business, my only secret is I show up first and I leave last. That's how I've been successful in any endeavor.
Awesome. You guys heard it from Maceo Jourdan. Show up first, leave last. But I would like to add, all these guys are, there's nothing super special about them. They're just normal guys who, they just put in the work. They may have had some advantages, but not. They're not. We like you were saying, we hold them up as glorified or golden cows. What do we call them? Sacred cows. Sacred cows. Sacred cows. Golden calf's a different thing. Well, no, it's actually the same thing. But anyways.
No, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Our golden calves. I'm going to steal that from you immediately.
So none of these guys have anything special. But Elon Musk is a Martian. So anyways, all right, everybody, go love God, love neighbor, and build something. Talk to you later.